Dexter didn't just reunite with Harrison, he manipulated him into becoming a killer. From the moment they met again, Dexter wasn't guiding his son to a better life. He was shaping him into a reflection of himself. Harrison wasn't born a murderer. He hesitated. He questioned, but Dexter never gave him a choice. Every doubt was met with reassurance. Every moment of hesitation was twisted into validation, until killing felt inevitable. So here's the real question. Did Harrison ever have control over his fate, or was this always part of Dexter's plan? By the end of this video, you'll see just how deep the manipulation went, and why Harrison may never escape it. He didn't grow up like other kids. He wasn't just abandoned. He was abandoned by a killer. That leaves a mark. When he finally finds Dexter, he's looking for one thing: stability, a father figure, a sense of belonging, someone who can explain why he feels the way he does. And Dexter? He sees something else entirely. Instead of reassuring Harrison that he can have a normal life, Dexter immediately tests him. Subtle, but effective. Did you ever hurt animals as a kid? It's not just a question, it's an assessment, a baited trap. And Harrison, desperate for approval, leans into it. He tells Dexter about breaking a kid's arm in a fight, about his rage, about the satisfaction he felt when it happened. Dexter's response? He doesn't say that's wrong. He doesn't say we should get you help. He smiles. And that single, subtle reaction changes everything. At that moment, Harrison sees it as acceptance. Finally, someone understands him. Finally, someone tells him that he isn't broken. But that's not what Dexter is really doing. What Dexter is doing is planting the first seed. Because here's the truth. Harrison was never destined to be like Dexter. But unlike what Dexter wanted to believe, his son did experience the same kind of trauma. Harrison wasn't spared from the blood. He was born into it. He was just a baby when the Trinity killer murdered Rita. But that night, he sat in her blood, just like Dexter had once sat in his mother's. The difference? Dexter remembered it. It shaped him, haunted him, became the foundation of his dark passenger. Harrison, on the other hand, was too young to form those memories. The event may have left an imprint on his subconscious, but he didn't carry it with him in the same way. His life was different. He wasn't raised in a home built on secrets and rigid moral codes designed to contain a monster. He wasn't trained to kill. He wasn't forced into darkness. And yet, when Harrison returns, Dexter doesn't see a boy in need of stability. He sees an opportunity. What if your darkest instincts weren't something to be ashamed of, but something that made you special? It's the exact same thing Harry once did to Dexter. But this time, there's a crucial difference. Dexter thinks he's teaching Harrison the code, but in reality, he's breaking it at every turn. Harry at least believed he was helping Dexter control his urges, creating a rigid set of rules to contain the monster. Only kill the guilty, never get caught, channel the darkness into something with purpose. It was flawed, but it gave Dexter structure. With Harrison, Dexter says he's passing down the code, but his actions tell a different story. Instead of carefully guiding Harrison toward a set of rules, he pushes him toward revenge. Instead of enforcing restraint, he encourages emotional decisions. Instead of protecting his son from becoming a killer, he drags him into his own world of bloodshed. Dexter isn't training Harrison to follow a code. He's training him to be his reflection. The real tragedy? Harrison trusts him, and trust in the wrong hands is more dangerous than any weapon. Harrison wants to belong so badly that he doesn't even realize he's being shaped, manipulated, conditioned. Dexter isn't offering him guidance. He's offering him a narrative, one that paints Harrison's violent tendencies as inevitable. And once that belief takes hold, it's almost impossible to undo. Psychologists call this self-fulfilling prophecy. When someone is repeatedly told they are a certain way, they begin to believe it, and that belief alters their behavior to align with the expectation. If Harrison is constantly reinforced with the idea that his rage makes him different, special, like his father, then eventually, he stops questioning it. He stops fighting it. He embraces it. And that's exactly what Dexter wants. Because at his core, Dexter is deeply alone. For years, he has accepted the idea that he will never be truly understood, never be able to connect with another human being in a meaningful way. Then Harrison arrives, a son he barely knows, but one who he desperately wants to believe is just like him. Because if Harrison is like him, then Dexter's existence is validated. His life, his darkness, his entire identity, it all makes sense now. That's why Dexter clings to this idea so fiercely. If Harrison can kill, then Dexter was never truly alone. But there's a problem with this logic. Harrison isn't like Dexter, and deep down, he knows it. He flinches when Dexter talks about murder so casually. He hesitates when violence is framed as the only solution. He questions whether his anger defines him. But every time he shows doubt, Dexter is there to pull him back in. And the worst part? Dexter doesn't even think he's manipulating Harrison. He believes he's helping him. That's what makes his influence so dangerous. Manipulation is most effective when the manipulator truly believes they are doing the right thing. And Dexter, in his twisted way, thinks he's saving Harrison from a life of confusion and suffering. But in reality, he's doing the exact opposite. He's stripping Harrison of his autonomy, his ability to define himself outside of his father's legacy. The more Dexter pushes, the more Harrison loses himself. And by the time he realizes what's happening, it might already be too late. Because once you convince someone that their path is set in stone, once you take away their belief in free will, they stop fighting back. And when that happens, when someone accepts the darkness inside them as their only truth, they become exactly what they were told they would be. That's how you create a killer, not by forcing them, but by making them believe they never had a choice. Let's step into Harrison's shoes. First, your mother was murdered in front of you. Then, the only mother figure you had left, Hannah, died. After that, it was one foster home after another, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. No roots, no stability, no one to tell you who you are or where you're supposed to be. And with every move, every rejection, the same feeling creeps in. What's wrong with me? It flares up when you least expect it. When another family gives up on you. When another school labels you a problem. When you get into fights because the anger is too much to keep inside. It's not that you feel different from everyone else. It's that you feel like no one ever sees you. Then, one day, you find him, your father, a man you thought had abandoned you, but who welcomes you back with open arms, a man who finally understands. And for the first time in your life, you feel like maybe you weren't meant to be lost. Maybe you were just waiting to be found. But what you don't realize, you weren't walking into a home, you were walking into a trap. And then, one day, you meet someone who tells you, that's not a bad thing, that maybe it makes you better than other people, that your anger isn't something to fight, it's something to use. That's what Dexter did. But the brilliance of his manipulation was that he didn't force it on Harrison. He let Harrison come to that conclusion himself. He let the idea simmer, planting suggestions, letting Harrison's own doubts do the rest. Manipulation doesn't work when you shove an idea down someone's throat. It works when you make them think they arrived at it on their own. When Ethan was attacked, Dexter could have condemned Harrison's actions. He could have said, violence isn't the answer. He could have reassured Harrison that his reaction didn't define him. But he didn't. Instead, he planted doubt. He subtly steered the conversation so that Harrison wouldn't feel guilty, shifting the blame onto Ethan. Ethan was dangerous. Ethan was the real monster. Harrison just stopped him first. And that small shift in perspective is all it takes. It was a classic Dexter move, reframing the narrative so that the crime doesn't feel like a crime at all. And once you strip away guilt, you strip away the internal resistance to committing violence. Dexter knew this better than anyone. He lived by it. The first step to killing isn't the act itself, it's rationalizing why it had to be done. And when Harrison started questioning himself, when he expressed fear that he might be dangerous, Dexter didn't correct him. He didn't tell him that he had a choice. He told him, I understand you. And that's all it takes. The idea that someone finally sees you. That maybe the thing you were most ashamed of is actually the thing that makes you special. That instead of suppressing it, you should embrace it. Because when someone feels isolated, when they feel like no one in the world understands them, the first person who offers validation becomes the voice they trust. It doesn't matter whether that voice is leading them down the wrong path. What matters is that it makes them feel seen. And that's exactly what Dexter did. But what Dexter never told Harrison, that he wasn't just trying to help him, he was shaping him. Because here's the truth, Harrison was never broken. His rage, his anger, his need for control, those weren't signs of something dark inside him. They were signs of an abandoned child trying to make sense of his pain, a child who had been searching for belonging his entire life, a child who needed a father to tell him that he was going to be okay. And Dexter, instead of showing Harrison that he could be something more, he told him that he was exactly like him, that his anger wasn't just normal, it was his destiny. It's the same psychological mechanism cult leaders use when they recruit vulnerable people. They seek out individuals who are lost, who are looking for purpose, and they offer them a new identity. They tell them that their struggles, their pain, their anger, those aren't weaknesses. Those are gifts, and they are special because of them. Once you convince someone that their darkness is their strength, they stop fighting it. They become it. And that's exactly what Dexter did to Harrison. The scariest part? Dexter likely didn't even realize what he was doing. He wasn't sitting there, twirling his fingers like a villain, planning Harrison's descent into darkness. In his mind, he was helping. He believed that he was finally giving Harrison the truth, that he was the only one who could help Harrison understand himself. And that's what made the manipulation so effective. Because true manipulation doesn't come from malice, it comes from conviction. Dexter believed what he was telling Harrison, and so Harrison believed it too. And that's how you turn someone into a killer. You don't force them into it. You make them believe it was their choice all along. This is where everything shifts. Up until now, Dexter has been feeding Harrison's mind, carefully constructing the narrative that they are the same, that his rage isn't something to fear, it's something to use, that there's a purpose behind it, a higher function, something that makes him more than just an ordinary person. But a belief isn't enough. Harrison has to act on it. And the moment arrives when Kurt Caldwell stands before him, ready to take his life. In any other reality, this should have been the moment where Dexter, as a father, teaches his son how to walk away from violence, how to control his impulses instead of giving in to them, how to choose another path. But that's not what happens. Dexter doesn't just save Harrison. He uses the moment. He turns it into a lesson, a test, a final push. He tells Harrison they have no choice, that people like Kurt can't be reasoned with, that the only way to stop evil is to end it. Think about that for a second. If a father tells his son that killing is necessary, that taking a life isn't just an option but the only way to bring justice, what do you think that son will believe? Harrison doesn't hesitate because he enjoys violence. He hesitates because he doesn't want to do this. He's still waiting for Dexter to tell him that there's another way, that this doesn't have to define him, that they can escape the cycle of blood and revenge. But that moment never comes. Instead, Dexter reassures him that this is the right thing to do, that this is who they are. Because here's what makes this moment even more disturbing. Harrison doesn't have a frame of reference. He's never been taught another way. He's never had a parent sit him down and explain morality, justice, consequence. Hannah raised him with love, but she also kept him isolated. She made choices for him, never allowing him to truly question his place in the world. He was raised in secrecy, in the shadows of someone else's crimes. So when Dexter steps in and tells him, "This is what we do, this is who we are," Harrison accepts it. And in that moment, he stops being Harrison Morgan. He becomes Dexter's creation. This isn't just about one kill. It's about everything leading up to it. Every small manipulation. Every time Dexter reinforced the idea that Harrison was different, that his instincts made him special, that people like them don't have the luxury of normal lives. This moment isn't a decision. It's a culmination, a result of carefully placed suggestions, of strategic validation, of psychological priming. Dexter needed Harrison to believe this was his nature. Because if Harrison wasn't like him, then what did that say about Dexter? By the time Harrison raises that rifle and pulls the trigger, he's not making a choice. He's following the only logic that's been given to him. And that's how true manipulation works. You don't just convince someone to act. You make them believe they were always meant to. Because if someone believes something is inevitable, they stop resisting. They stop questioning. They become exactly what they were told they had to be. And in that moment, Harrison isn't just killing Kurt. He's killing the last piece of himself that thought he could ever be anything else. Now we get to the most unsettling part of all. Was Harrison always going to be this way? Or did Dexter make it inevitable? This is the ultimate question. Because here's the truth. Harrison wasn't born a killer. He was made one. The proof? He hesitated every time. When he fought Ethan, he felt guilty. When Dexter tried to convince him that they were the same, he resisted. He questioned whether his anger defined him, whether his violent instincts were something innate or something he could change. At every turn, he showed something Dexter never did, conscience. But Dexter never gave him the space to figure it out. He never let Harrison process his emotions in a normal, healthy way. Every doubt Harrison had, Dexter countered with reassurance. Every fear he voiced, Dexter drowned out with validation. It was never, "You don't have to be this way." It was always, "I understand you. I see you. This is just who you are." And that's what made it inevitable. Not genetics, not trauma, but the fact that Dexter never gave Harrison another choice. Dexter had already decided who Harrison was supposed to be before Harrison could decide for himself. And when someone you love, someone you trust, tells you that your worst impulses are natural, that your fear is misplaced, that resistance is futile, eventually you stop resisting. That's what makes this so terrifying. This wasn't a story of Harrison discovering his true nature. It was a story of Dexter imposing his own identity onto his son. And yet, Harrison wanted a choice. That's what makes him different from Dexter. He wanted to be something more. He questioned Ethan's attack because, deep down, he knew something felt off about it. He questioned Dexter's way of life because some part of him didn't want to follow the same path. He questioned whether he had to kill at all, but Dexter kept pushing, kept nudging him toward the inevitable, reinforcing the idea that there was no other way, that their existence was bound to a cycle of blood, violence, and justification. And in the end, that's exactly why he did what he did. Because when the moment finally came, when he stood there with the rifle aimed at Dexter, it wasn't just about stopping his father. It was about rejecting him. This wasn't a crime of passion, it wasn't revenge. It was Harrison making a choice for the first time in his life. Dexter had spent all this time trying to convince Harrison that they were the same, that this was his destiny, that killing wasn't just necessary, it was right. But when Harrison saw the full picture, when he understood what Dexter had done, the people he had hurt, the cycle he was trapped in, he realized the one thing Dexter never did, that he could make a choice. And in that moment, when he pulled the trigger, it wasn't just an execution, it was a rejection of everything Dexter had tried to turn him into, a rejection of the logic, the manipulation, the idea that violence could ever be justified, a rejection of the identity that Dexter had forced onto him. But the real question is, was it enough? Because rejecting Dexter doesn't erase the damage that was done. It doesn't erase years of subconscious conditioning. It doesn't undo the moments where Dexter made him question his own morality. It doesn't change the fact that, deep down, Harrison now carries the knowledge that he can kill, that he has already crossed that line. And once you cross it, can you ever truly go back? And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Because even though Harrison rejected Dexter, even though he broke the cycle in the only way he knew how, the cycle still left a mark. And whether he wants to admit it or not, the shadow of Dexter Morgan will follow him for the rest of his life. So here's the real question you need to ask yourself. If someone has manipulated their entire life into believing they're something, can they ever truly escape it? Harrison drove off that night believing he had broken the cycle, that he had killed more than just his father. He had killed the part of himself that Dexter tried to create. But does killing the manipulator erase the manipulation? Trauma doesn't disappear. Conditioning doesn't unravel overnight. And the scariest part, the seed Dexter planted might still be there, buried deep, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Harrison may have killed Dexter, but Dexter's influence? That's a different story. What happens when life pushes him to the edge again? When rage bubbles up? When the world feels unjust? When his instincts scream for a solution that only Dexter ever made sense of? What do you think he'll do? Because here's the thing. Harrison was told his darkness was his destiny, that he was born to be something. And if you spend enough time convincing someone that they are a monster, eventually they might just become one. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Dexter is probably not even dead. Every Dexter fan knows there's a new season coming. And if we've learned anything from this show, it's that nothing is ever as it seems. So if Dexter is still alive, what does that mean for Harrison? Did he truly break free? Or is his father's return inevitable? Because if Dexter comes back, what happens when Harrison is faced with him again? Was Harrison ever really free? Or was this all just the next step in the evolution of the monster Dexter created? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.